The Duke of Wexcombe said it across his own dining table to the man on his right, in the carrying undertone of a person who intends to be overheard by the one he is discussing. She has nothing to offer. I cannot think why my aunt insisted on the invitation. Susanna Hart, seated where such women are seated, below the salt, between a deaf cannon and an empty chair, heard the whole of it, and did not pause with her spoon. She was 28, dressed in grey that had been good 6 years before, and had been asked to Wexcombe at the insistence of the dowager, who remembered her father. She had come knowing precisely what the evening would be, and it had been precisely that, looked at once, at the door, and dismissed in the time it took the Duke to decide she was neither useful nor ornamental, and then not quite ignored for 2 hours by 14 people who took their lead from the head of the table. She let the sentence sit in her. She had grown very good, over 6 years, at letting things sit without showing where they landed. At her feet was a plain travelling bag of worn leather, and inside it, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with tape, were 141 letters in the Duke of Wexcombe's own hand, written between 15 and 19. Every one addressed to her dead father, and every one true in a way the man at the head of the table had spent a decade making certain nobody would ever call him to account. 4. She had not come to use them. That was the part he would find hardest to believe, and the part that was entirely true. She had come to give them back. Her father had been Josiah Hart, and for 4 years he had been tutor to Gabriel Anmer before Gabriel Anmer was anything but a second son with an elder brother between himself and the title. That was the thing the Duke of Wexcombe had spent 10 years arranging never to mention. A duke does not care to be reminded that he was once a boy who construed Latin badly and wept when he was homesick and was taught by a clergyman's son from Norfolk, paid £90 a year and worth 10 times it. Josiah Hart had died in the spring of 1811, in a cottage at Diss he could no longer quite afford, and had left his daughter 2 things, a small mahogany writing box and the letters. Susanna had not known about them until she cleared the box. Her father had kept every one, 141, over 4 years, from a boy who had gone away to Harrow and then to Oxford, and written to his old tutor the whole time, because there was no one else in his life he could tell the truth to. Most were not remarkable. They were full of Greek and horses and the tyranny of a housemaster and the death of a favourite dog. But cumulatively they were the record of a young man's soul, and there were things in them Gabriel Anmer had written at 17 that Susanna had read at 24 with her hand pressed to her mouth, because the boy who wrote them and the man who now held the dukedom were not, on the evidence, the same person at all. The elder brother had died in 1809, thrown from a curricle he drove too fast, and Gabriel Anmer had become the heir, and within 2 years the Duke, and the change in him had been remarked upon by everyone who knew him before. He had put away the boy entirely. He had come into a great inheritance encumbered with great debts, and had set himself to putting it right with a coldness that frightened people who had known him warm. He had put up rents. He had enclosed the common at Wexcombe Ash, and turned 40 families off land their people had grazed for 100 years, inside the law and without one visible pang. He had married nobody, being known to consider the field with the care of a man buying bloodstock. And in the autumn of 1817 he had turned his attention to the last unenclosed stretch of Wexcombe, the water meadows along the Deben below Diss, where 11 tenant families still held by old copyhold and paid the old rents, and where the churchyard was in which Josiah Hart lay buried. That was why Susanna had come. She had heard in Diss that the Water Meadow copyholds were to be broken at the Michaelmas court, and that the 11 families would go the way the 40 had gone at Wexcombe Ash, and had understood that she was, quite possibly, the only person in England who possessed the thing that might stop it. Not a legal thing. She had no legal thing. She had 141 letters from a boy of 17, and in one of them she knew the very fold of it that boy had written to her father about the water meadows below Diss, and about a promise he had made to himself, in ink, at 17, that he had plainly forgotten he had ever made. She had written to the Dowager Duchess first, because it was the only door she had, and the Dowager, the Duke's father's sister, who had known Josiah Hart, had answered within the week that she would arrange an invitation for the very week of the Michaelmas court, and that Susanna was to come and say nothing to anybody until she, the Dowager, had had the measure of the thing. So Susanna had come, and had watched the Duke dismiss her at his door as a woman with nothing to offer, and had carried 141 letters to his table under the tablecloth, and had waited, because the Dowager had said wait, and because she had learnt in 6 years that the moment matters more than the message. The moment came with the second remove. The talk had turned, as it was always going to with the Michaelmas court 2 days off, to the water meadows. A florid man named Sir Hugh Pardew, who held land beyond the Deben and stood to graze it cheaper once the copyholds were broken, raised his glass and said it was a fine thing to see a landlord with the resolution to do what wanted doing. That sentiment was the ruin of good husbandry, and that the 11 families would be far better off as wage labour than as copyholders scratching a living off ground that would carry 3 times the sheep under a single hand. They will not think so on Thursday, said the Dowager Duchess, from her end of the table, dry as a stick. They never do, ma'am, said Sir Hugh, comfortably, but a man cannot run an estate on what tenants think. Is that not so, Wexcombe? And the Duke of Wexcombe, who had straightened the greatest encumbered fortune in 3 counties by never once allowing himself to be run on what tenants thought, said, "It is so. The water meadows are the last of it. After Thursday, Wexcombe will be in order for the first time in 40 years, and I will hear no more about the families, because there is nothing to be done for people who will not do for themselves." "There was a time," said the Dowager, "when you thought otherwise." "I was a boy," said the Duke. "Boys think a great many things. Then they inherit," and Susanna Hart set down her spoon and lifted the worn leather bag into her lap and untied the tape. "Your Grace," she said. The table did not hear her at first, because a woman below the salt does not speak, and the sound of her speaking took a moment to be understood as speech. "Your Grace," she said again, and this time the room turned, because there was something in the second saying the first had not had. The Duke looked down the length of his table at a woman in grey he had already forgotten twice, and his face arranged itself into the patience a man keeps for tedium. "Madam, you said at the beginning of this dinner that I have nothing to offer." Susanna's voice was quite level. She had rehearsed the levelness for 6 years without knowing it. "You said it to Mr. Fenwick, on your right, in a voice you meant me to hear, and I did hear it, and I have been thinking about it these 2 hours. And I find I would like to answer it." "May I?" "Susanna," said the Dowager, very quietly, which was not a warning to stop, but a warning to be sure. "I am sure, ma'am." She did not look away from the Duke. "You do not know my name, though you have said it once already tonight without knowing it." "My name is Susanna Hart. My father was Josiah Hart, of Diss. For 4 years, between your 10th birthday and your 14th, he was your tutor." The Duke of Wexcombe went very still. It was not a large stillness, and nobody at that table but the Dowager would have marked it. But Susanna had spent 4 years reading a boy's soul in his own hand, and she knew the shape of Gabriel Anmer stopping breathing, and she saw it now in the man. "I do not discuss my childhood at dinner, Miss Hart." "No, Your Grace. You do not discuss it anywhere, and I understand why, and I have not come to make you." She lifted the oilcloth packet out of the bag and set it on the tablecloth, and the whole table looked at it, because a woman with nothing to offer does not produce a packet tied with faded tape as though it were the plate. "My father kept every letter you wrote him, from the day you went to Harrow until the year before you left Oxford. 141 of them. I have them here." The silence acquired a texture. "You will understand," said the Duke of Wexcombe, his voice gone colder than it had been all evening, "that if you have come to my house to threaten me, Miss Hart, you have chosen your ground very badly. There is nothing in a schoolboy's letters that a grown man need fear, and a woman who produces private correspondence at a duke's table has told the room exactly what she is." "I have not come to threaten you," said Susanna Hart, "and I am going to prove it in a moment in the only way I can, which is by giving them to you. All of them, tonight, to keep or to burn. But I am going to read you one first, out loud, at this table, and you are going to let me, because you have just told 14 people that I have nothing to offer, and I cannot let that be the last thing said about my father's daughter in this house." She untied the tape. "I am not going to read you the one where you wept at Harrow, though I have it, because that is yours, and not the room's. I am going to read you one letter, and it is not a private one. It is about land. You wrote it in the June of the year you were 17, from Wexcombe to my father, who was by then at Diss and dying though neither of you knew it yet." She drew out a single sheet, browned at the folds, and did not need to search for it because she had read it 100 times. "You had spent an afternoon walking the water meadows below Diss, the ones that come up for the court on Thursday. And you wrote to my father about it." And Susanna Hart began to read, in the plain, carrying, unbeautiful voice of a woman who had learnt her letters at that same tutor's knee. The words a boy of 17 had written 30 years of character ago. "Dear Mr. Hart," she read, "I walked down to the Debon Meadows this morning with Coker's boy to see the hay got in, and I have been turning it over all day, and I must tell somebody or burst, and there is no one here I can tell but you. There were 11 families in that meadow, sir, old and young of them. A woman of 80 raking with a child of 4, and they got in a crop between them that my father's steward swears will not pay. Coker says they hold by a copyhold so old nobody can read it, and that one day it will all have to be put right and the ground made to pay, and I dare say he is correct, for he is always correct about money. But I stood at the gate, Mr. Hart, and watched a whole parish get in its own hay on its own ground, and thought, I do not care whether it pays. I have 10,000 a year coming to me that I did nothing to earn, and here is a meadow that pays nobody very much, and feeds everybody a little, and I could not for my life see what was wrong with it. I know I shall be told what is wrong with it. I am to be a man of property, and I shall be told my whole life what is wrong with anything that does not pay. But I want to set it down to you now, while I am too young to have learnt better, so that if I ever grow into the kind of man who breaks a meadow like that one for the sake of the sheep it would carry, there will be a letter in your keeping. In my own hand to tell me I knew at 17 exactly what I was doing, and did it anyway, and have no excuse of ignorance, only of having grown up. Keep this letter, sir, keep it against me. Your affectionate pupil, Gabriel. Susanna Hart set the letter down flat on the tablecloth, and folded her hands and looked at the Duke of Wexcombe and did not say anything at all. Nobody said anything at all. The Duke sat at the head of his own table with the candles burning down, and every soul in that room was looking at him, and his face had gone the colour of the tablecloth, and he did not reach for his wine, because a man who reaches for his wine in that moment has answered. "Give me the letter," he said. His voice was not quite his own. "I will give you all of them," said Susanna. "That is why I came, not to keep them over you, to give them back. They are yours. My father only kept them because you asked him to, for exactly the reason I have just read out, and he kept the faith of a boy for the whole of his life, and never once, not in the worst of the poverty, thought of them as anything but a trust." She pushed the oilcloth packet down the table, hand to hand, until a footman carried it the length of the room and set it before the Duke. There, 140. "The 41st is in my hand, and you have just heard it, and I will give you that too, and then I will have nothing of yours at all, and you may say again, with perfect truth, that I have nothing to offer." The Duke of Wexcombe put his hand flat on the packet of his own boyhood and did not open it. "Why," he said, "would you give me the one thing you hold? Because my father would not have blackmailed you for the world," said Susanna Hart, "and I am my father's daughter, and I would rather lose the water meadows than become, to save them, the kind of person you have become to save your estate. I could have kept these back. I could have named a price. I did not, and I want you to notice that I am handing you the letter about the meadows 2 days before the court, and asking you for nothing, because that is the whole of what I have to offer, and it turns out to be the one thing you cannot buy and cannot enclose and have not got." He did not go to the court on Thursday. That went through 3 counties in a week. The Michaelmas court was convened, and the Duke's own steward stood up to move the breaking of the copyholds, and the Duke was not there, and the motion was not made, and the 11 families went home along the Deben not knowing why. He did not explain himself to his steward, who was furious, or to the county, which talked. He simply did not do the thing, and let the not doing stand. But he came to Diss. He came in the 2nd week of October, alone without sending word, and found Susanna Hart in the churchyard where her father was buried, and got down at the gate and stood there with his hat in his hands, like a man who had forgotten how it was done. "I have read them," he said, "all of them. Twice I sat up 2 nights with them. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been ill. I want to say something, and I have not the least idea how to begin it, because I have spent 10 years making certain I would never have to say anything I felt, and I find I have got out of the way of it entirely." "Then say the plainest thing first, Your Grace," said Susanna, "and let the rest come after. It is how my father taught you to construe. First the verb, then the sense." Something went across the Duke of Wexcombe's face that was very close to a laugh and very close to the other thing. "The plainest thing," he said, "is that I had forgotten I was ever that boy, and did not know until I read my own hand that I had spent 10 years grieving him without knowing his name. I thought I had become hard because the estate required it. I read those letters and understood that I became hard because it was easier than being the person who wrote them, in a world that was going to cost that person everything." He stopped. "That is 3 things. I told you I had got out of the way of it." He came back the next week, and the week after. He did not court her, at first, because he did not know how, and because there was a chasm between them neither pretended was not there. A duke and a dead tutor's daughter, 10,000 a year and a rented room, the enclosed common at Wexcombe Ash that no letter was going to unenclose. Susanna did not forget Wexcombe Ash, and did not let him forget it either. You want me to tell you that you are forgiven, she said to him, in the churchyard on the third visit. For the meadows and the common and all of it. And I will not, your grace, because it is not mine to give, it belongs to 40 families at Wexcombe Ash, who are not here, and 11 along the Deben, who do not yet know your name is the reason they kept their hay. I am not the person you wronged. I am only the person who happened to be keeping the letter. Then what am I to do? You are to be the man who wrote the letter, said Susanna Hart, or you are to be the man who broke the meadow. You have been the second for 10 years, and you have just for 2 days running been the first. I cannot tell you which to be. I can only tell you that I know the difference, because I have both of them in my father's writing box, and I have read them side by side. And I know exactly what it cost the boy to become the Duke. The trouble, when it came from Sir Hugh Pardew, who had lost the cheap grazing he had counted on, and did not intend to lose it quietly. He could not touch the Duke. But he could touch the Duke's reason, and by the end of October he had discovered who she was, the tutor's daughter, the woman in grey who had produced a packet of letters at the Wexcombe table, and he had built, out of entirely true facts, a thing that was entirely a lie. The facts were these, that a reduced spinster of no fortune had arrived at Wexcombe, uninvited, produced private letters at his table, and that within a fortnight the Duke had abandoned a court motion worth thousands and taken to riding to Diss alone. Set down in that order, in the mouth of a man who wished harm, it made one story, and it was the oldest there is, that the tutor's daughter had got hold of something shameful and was bleeding him with it, and had stopped the enclosure as her price. Sir Hugh told it well, and it took. By November it was established in 4 drawing rooms that the Duke of Wexcombe was being blackmailed by a clergyman's daughter, and the Dowager Duchess sent Susanna a note that said only, "He will offer to marry you now to stop the talk, and you must not let him, and I will explain when I see you." He offered to marry her within the week, exactly as the Dowager had said he would. He came to Diss, and he stood in the small parlour of her lodgings, and he said it plainly, first the verb, then the sense. The way she had taught him back, marry me. It stops the story. There is no version of the story that survives you becoming my wife, because a man does not marry the woman who is blackmailing him, and the county knows it, and it ends the thing in a day. "Sit down, your grace," said Susanna Hart. "Susanna, sit down, and think for one moment about what you have just offered me, and about your own aunt's letter, which I see in your face you know she wrote. She was very pale and entirely steady. You have offered to marry me to stop a story. That is a repair, your grace, not a proposal, and I have spent my whole life being the useful solution to other people's difficulties, the daughter who nursed her father, the woman below the salt who makes up the numbers. And I find I have got to the end of it. I will not be the wife you married to mend your reputation. In 10 years, in the middle of some quarrel about a drain, you would remember you did it, and I would know you were remembering, and I would rather keep my rented room. Then what am I to do?" It was the 3rd time he had asked her that in a churchyard or a parlour, and she heard that he knew it. "You are to do the thing you have spent 10 years never doing," said Susanna. "You are to tell the truth in public, at cost to yourself, and let it stand without a wife to hide behind. Sir Hugh has told the county I hold something shameful over you. There is one way to take that story to pieces, your grace, and it is not to marry me. It is to show them what the letters actually are." He did it at the Wexcombe rent audit in the 3rd week of November, which was the one occasion in the year the whole county came to Wexcombe as of right. Tenants and neighbours and the steward and the parson and Sir Hugh Pardew himself, in the great hall, with the long tables set out for the paying of the Michaelmas rents that had, this year, not been raised. The Duke of Wexcombe stood up before the whole of it, which no landlord does, the audit being the steward's day, and he said, "You have all heard a story about me and a woman from Dis. I am going to tell you the true one, because I have discovered lately that a man who will not tell the truth in public has no way of stopping other men from telling lies in it, and I am tired of the lies. And I have only myself to blame that they found such easy ground. 30 years ago I was tutored by a clergyman's son named Josiah Hart, who is buried at Dis, and who was the best man I have known, and whom I have spent 10 years being ashamed to have needed. When I was a boy I wrote him letters. He kept them. He died poor, and he never once, in the worst of it, thought to sell them, though there were things in them a lesser man could have made money by. Because he had promised a boy of 17 he would keep them, and he kept faith with that boy for the whole of his life. When his daughter came to my table last month, I said in her hearing that she had nothing to offer. She answered me by giving me back 141 of my own letters and asking me for nothing at all. 2 days before I was to break the Water Meadow copyholds she could have named as her price, and did not. I did not break the copyholds. You have all wondered why. This is why. In one of those letters, written when I was 17, I set down that if I ever grew into a man who would break a meadow like that one for the sheep it would carry, it would not be from ignorance, because I knew. At 17, exactly what such a thing was. Miss Hart read me my own words at my own table. She did not threaten me with them. She handed them to me, and I found that I would rather be the boy who wrote them than the man who had forgotten them, and that is the whole of the story, and there is not one shameful thing in it except the 10 years I spent being the second man and calling it good management. He turned to Sir Hugh Pardew, who had gone the colour of tallow at the end of the table. "You have told the county I am being blackmailed, sir. I am not. I am being reminded. There is a great difference, and I have just explained it to 200 people, and I will thank you to explain, in your turn, why a man who lost a little cheap grazing was so very eager to have it thought that a dead tutor's daughter was a thief." Sir Hugh Pardew did not answer, because there was no answer, and he left the hall inside of 5 minutes and left the county inside of the year, because a man shown in front of 200 people to have manufactured a lie against a poor woman to recover a grazing lease is a man whose word is worth nothing at any table afterward. The story turned over in a week. By December it was established in the same 4 drawing rooms that the Duke of Wexcombe had been reminded of his own better nature by the daughter of his old tutor, and had kept 11 families on their land because of it, and it was a better story than the first one, and it had the advantage of being true. And the Duke of Wexcombe came to Dis in December, and did not offer to marry Susanna Hart to stop anything, because there was nothing left to stop. He offered for a different reason, and he did it badly, and she always said afterward that the badness was how she knew it was real. "I have had 2 months," he said, in the churchyard, in the cold, with her father's stone beside them. "I want that on the record, because you told me a proposal to stop a story was a repair, and there is no story left to stop, and I have waited on purpose so that you would know it. I am not asking you because I need you to be my wife. I am asking you because I have been 2 men in my life, the one who wrote those letters and the one who forgot them. And you are the only person alive who has met both of them and known the difference, and I find I cannot become the second one again in a house you are living in. That is the reason. It is a selfish one. I want to marry the woman who keeps the boy honest, because I have proved I cannot do it by myself. Susanna Hart stood by her father's grave a long moment. "You have left something out," she said. "Wexcombe Ash. 40 families. I have not forgotten it, and if you are going to have me, you are going to have that as well. A wife who remembers the common you enclosed every day of your life, and says so." "I know it," said the Duke of Wexcombe. "I am counting on it. I have a steward who will tell me a thing pays, and a county that will tell me a thing is wise. I have never in 10 years had anybody in my house who would tell me a thing is wrong. I would like to marry her, if she will have me, and I would like her to go on doing it until I die." "Then yes," said Susanna Hart, "and the letters stay in my father's writing box, your grace, and our children will read them, both men, side by side, so that they know exactly what it costs. They were married at Diss in the spring, in the small church where Josiah Hart was buried, because Susanna would not be married anywhere he was not, and the Dowager Duchess came and wept and denied it. The Water Meadow copyholds were never broken. The Duke had them written into the estate settlement in perpetuity, which his steward called madness and his wife called the first honest paragraph in the whole document, and the 11 families along the Deben hold their hayground on the old rents to this day. Wexcombe Ash could not be undone. The common was enclosed and the 40 families were gone, and no letter and no marriage brought them back, and the Duke carried that to the end of his life, and his wife let him carry it. Because some things are not forgiven by the person who did not suffer them, and she had told him so at the beginning, and never took it back. But he built at Wexcombe Ash a school and a set of almshouses out of his own income, endowed in the name of Josiah Hart, and went to look at them every year, which was the part his wife cared about, that he went to look at the ground he had cleared, and did not let himself forget. There is a mahogany writing box at Wexcombe now, in the room the Duchess used, and it holds 141 letters in a boy's hand and a folded note in a woman's, and each child of that house reads them in turn when they are judged old enough to understand what a person can become and what it costs. The Duke read them once a year himself, to the end of his life, on the anniversary of the day a woman in grey had produced a packet of oilcloth at his table and answered him. "You said I had nothing to offer," Susanna said to him the last autumn of his life, finding him with the box open on his knees. "I did." He did not look up from his own 17-year-old hand. "I have never in my life been so completely wrong about the contents of a room, and I have thought about it every year, and I have concluded that it is the single most useful mistake I ever made, because it made you speak." He closed the box. "You had everything to offer, Susanna. You had me. You had the whole of me, in a bag under the table, and you gave it back for nothing. And I have spent 40 years trying to be worth the return of it." "And," said Susanna Hart, Duchess of Wexcombe, who had learnt levelness at 28 and never quite lost the trick of it, "were you?" "Very nearly," said the Duke. "I was out by Wexcombe Ash. I have always been out by Wexcombe Ash." He put his hand over hers on the lid of the box. "But you never once let me pretend I wasn't, and I have come to think that is the whole of what a good wife is, and the whole of what your father was, and the whole of what those letters were kept for. Somebody to hold the plain truth of you where you cannot enclose it, and read it back when you have forgotten, and love you enough to do it out loud."